And after that epic
Hey,
intro, hey.
everyone. So, yeah, Windblaze here. I thought I'd play a little Resident Evil 3, talk about, and just sort of record my thoughts about the series and sort of horror games.
And I'm his friend Will, and
Yeah,
I'm just here to bullshit with him about the series, our history.
throw in
Our history of the series,
commentary.
each other's history of the series is kind of different, so and I'm sure
Yeah.
our opinions about certain things are
So,
going to be
go hard or easy? Well, I guess I could get frustrated when playing it, but I don't want to have to think about actually like the game that much.
Yeah, this is just for
more on my thoughts.
It's for
so,
entertainment purposes. It's just the background.
Okay.
This is just it's a template for our conversation.
Yeah. So right off the bat, I know Resident Evil 3 was actually marketed. It was actually developed as like more of a side story before it turned
Like
into
a
like an
spin-off?
official sequel. And the actual like thing that was going to like further the story was actually Code Veronica,
Huh.
which
okay.
I've never actually played Code Veronica. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I'm sure there's people that could be their favorite entry, and so we have no opinion about that one.
Yeah.
But I heard good things.
Yeah, I heard good things too. That was on the Dreamcast, of course.
And was Code Veronica X, was that a spin-off or was that a remake of Code Veronica? I don't remember.
No.
God, I'm so stupid. Like I feel like I suppose we could look it up.
At any rate, I think Resident Evil 2 and 3 are really the classic ones that everyone points to. Like this is really like the high point of the series. 2, 3, and 4.
2, 3, and 4 in the middle. But it's
The
four is
first one.
different.
The first one I think is still really beloved by a lot of people.
But its age shows more.
Yeah, you can see some spots where it's sort of rough around the edges. That said, like I still remember watching like my brother play through like RE1 and or like playing through it myself, and like I gotta tell you, like when that zombie dog like jumped through the hallway, that was like the scariest thing ever. Like that's like a classic horror memory.
It's interesting that this introduction, I mean, the game stays with me because Resident Evil 3 was the game I played the most out of the series. It's probably the game I've played the most out of the whole series, actually, overall. And I love this part right here. Never! But anyway, this segment, this cutscene, just illustrates, like, a type of atmosphere that I just really, I don't want to say, like, miss, like, as if Resident Evil games are bad or anything. It has a different feel, like, and I miss the whole Raccoon City, it getting taken over by zombies, and it's dark and rainy.
Yeah, and that's something I did want to discuss was, how has like the series changed over the years? And like, okay, I have to tell you, I might get some flack for this, but I do not actually think 5 and 6. I enjoyed 5 and 6 for what they were. I had fun with them playing through them with friends.
Hated 6 for some reason.
That's just one of those games that I played through quite a lot with my friends. I had a lot of fun with it, and like that's okay for me. That said, I can understand people's frustrations with it because I think the series once was like this pinnacle of like horror game,
survival horror,
and has just like fallen like really far from that.
It's more like action.
So
horror.
I can understand like why a lot of people are frustrated and upset with it. But yeah, I was just talking about this. I think after RE3, the series like really needed to innovate. It did so quite successfully with Resident Evil 4, really,
which everyone loves.
And everyone's like says, that's like this great game.
However, it comes with a price. Now everyone likes that version of Resident
and
Evil.
I think, like that did two things. Like, it was a really like great transition, but also I think it sort of made Capcom get away from what they were initially doing with the series, and they wanted to just make things more bigger and more epic and like crazy.
Yeah.
And have like these globe-trotting adventures, like in RE6 especially. And I don't think that's really conducive to like real like great video game horror.
Yeah.
I think like great like horror is often just like more like isolated. And like and scary. And I think one of the games this game does really well, especially is having the sense of just like this dead city and all these dead ends, and you don't like it's just open enough to where you're not like quite sure where you need to go exactly. So it is like there is some sense of exploration,
which is nice.
but
Yeah.
but the main thing behind it is just that like it's losing my train of thought. Oh yeah, that there's like a lot of dead ends and tight corners for you to get trapped in by Nemesis, and just the fact that that guy stalks you throughout the entire game, that's like really terrifying.
Oh my god! Like I always say that about
I think Nemesis will always be for me one of the video game bosses that I remember the most. I don't think like no matter how old I get, I am always going to point to Nemesis as one of like the most like frightening, intimidating video game bosses.
Well, because it's not even about it's the fact that for most of the story you can fight him, but you're not gonna defeat him really.
Yeah.
You defeat him, quote unquote, but you don't kill him. And like I said, I was more familiar with Resident Evil 3 when I had PlayStation, but my friend, who lived in the same apartment complex, he had an N64 instead of the PlayStation, and he has Resident Evil 2. He had Resident Evil 2. So I would go over there and play it with him. You know, he'd have the two different. What was kind of cool, I thought was cool that there was like two different games in it. That there was like from Leon's perspective and from Claire's perspective. But you know what? 3 always just scared me more. And even my friend had to admit that 3 just had a more element of terror to it because there was a specific enemy after you specifically. And,
right. Yeah.
Which was really scary.
I feel like that's a really great way to like set up some like classic like horror. Is like having something that's after you specifically to where every time you run into him, it doesn't feel like contrived.
Yeah.
Or like,
because it's
he
tracking
just
you
happened
down.
to be here. He just happened to bump into. We just happened to be in the same area throughout this entire
city.
He's a
persistent detective. He's looking for you. And the thing is,
I think that's like really, really great.
And you know what? It always actually I thought Resident Evil 3. You know how like you can technically like, oh look, this big opening with all the cops shooting and the whole city's been taken over. There's a big scale to the game, but for some reason having Nemesis there makes it feel more intimate because it's like a specific enemy and it's about you, and it makes the scale big, but doesn't feel like the game is too big for it to not be scary. Meaning, if you remember, like we were talking about Resident Evil 6, and it trying to be this huge globetrotting adventure, and the scale kind of isn't the greatest, it's not the greatest kind of setting for horror because horror is more intimate. It feeds on, your personal insecurities and nightmares and whatever. And if it's a huge scale event, then it's not usually as scary if there's too much action or whatever. But with this, sure, it's a big scale. It's a big city because the whole city's been taken over by zombies. But for some reason, because Nemesis is after only you, it just makes it feel like, oh crap, this whole city's against me. Yeah. And it just makes it scarier. And I knew my heart would sink every time I would be in like some location. I would hear some window break downstairs or something. I'd be like, crap. And then sure enough, a few seconds later, if I haven't moved fast enough, I'll hear stars. Yeah. I'm like, fuck.
But there's definitely something I think really charming to the way this game like handles horror because like just back in the days when like textures and environments weren't that super great looking. So what they had to do was like really focus on like the environment and just getting that atmosphere. I think atmosphere is something that's super, super important to a horror game.
Cool, man. That was hardcore, dude.
Yeah.
No, but I totally get you.
Cold-blooded. Yeah, atmosphere I feel like is just like super important to a horror game. And they do that really, really well. Just by like the sound effects. The sound design of this game is like freaking great.
It is. It really is. I actually like that the music is minimal.
Yeah. Hold on, just one second. Okay, so wait, what point was I making? Oh, sound design, right? Yeah. So I think what this game really does well is like the sound design. There's not the lack of music, which I think in a lot of the games will just seem kind of lonely and depressing.
Yeah.
It works to the benefit of this game. It's just really allows that all that nice ambient sound effects to really just like sort of spill out.
Yeah, and it just makes it more real, I think, because man, those noises stand out sometimes, like, and it makes it
Yeah.
a little bit, it makes it way more tense. Oof, damn. I'm a lead farmer, motherfucker.
So how did you feel about the GameCube remake?
The GameCube remake was probably, if you don't count it as its own game, which I think it was such an overhaul that it almost was its own game, it's probably one of the best Resident Evil games.
I would echo that. I think the addition of the Crimson Heads, especially.
Oh my god! Do you remember that night when you came over and we just played it all night? Pretty much, you went through the whole game, and it was like a movie. It was so intense, and the giant python and the shark, and I don't know, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was. I'm surprised. I just don't know, because they released GameCube versions of 2 and 3, but they weren't a huge overhaul like the first one. It wasn't like a whole other game. It's like they just kind of updated the graphics. And I always thought they should have done a remake. I still think they should.
I think one of the biggest requests of Capcom by far is please, for the love of God, remake RE2 with today's technology.
Yeah. Honestly, remember my idea about, since these games run parallel to each other, 2 and 3, honestly, with the amount of, obviously, space and what people's expectations of a game's length are these days.
You can fit 50 Resident Evil 2s on a Blu-ray disc.
Yeah, well, basically what I mean is that, just from a game storytelling perspective, it might be interesting, and since you go from, you basically take the Resident Evil 6 formula of having multiple stories congruent to each other. I know that 2 did that, but 3 took it a step further by having 3 or 4 stories happening, almost like 3 or 4 separate games. And you take that concept, pull it back a little bit, and obviously have the atmosphere of number 2 and 3.
Yeah.
You don't have the large scale and action of 6, but you have 3 stories going on. You combine the stories of Resident Evil 2 with Leon and Claire, and then with Nemesis, with Jill. And maybe actually have them interact more in a way, and just have them, because in this canon, these are happening at the same time. So if you did a remake around the same, that's the thing.
Technically, Leon, Claire.
I know, but because it's a remake, you can take some liberties about because it's kind of a little bit of a reboot of.
Yeah, I don't know. If I remember correctly, there are some weird continuity things that don't make.
Well, maybe you can rectify those with a remake. The thing is that, because they're so deeply connected, 2 and 3, I feel like you don't have to remake 2 and 3 as separate games. I feel like you can make 2 and 3. You can almost, if you want to, just for the marketing, call it Resident Evil 2 and 3. I would probably call it something else, but just maybe Resident Evil Nemesis or Resident Evil Raccoon City or something like that. But I don't know. I still think that's a good idea, because I feel like it's just a wasted effort to kind of go all the effort of just remaking 2. I feel like it wouldn't be long enough of a game by today's standards. It wouldn't be enough. You'd have to maybe combine the stories and make it this big giant.
Did you ever play Outbreak? Resident Evil Outbreak?
Nope. No.
Okay.
Was that the online one?
Yeah, that was the interesting thing. So before Left 4 Dead became Left 4 Dead, that was zombie survival co-op before zombie survival co-op was a thing.
A bit ahead of its time. And it didn't really work out too well.
Yeah, I think because you had to have the network adapter for the PS2, which a lot of people
did not have. Xbox was the one that paved the way more for the real online experience. To be fair, to give it credit, Xbox did it better, and even PlayStation Network later on kind of modeled its online, because it just they paved the way more. PS2 didn't do it. It was it came out too early. It was too early.
But Xbox, so one of the interesting things that they did in that game was they had I'm close. They had 8 different characters you could choose from, and each had their own special abilities and special items, very reminiscent of another older game, Capcom game, Sweet Home, which I believe that you and I are familiar with because we watched the movie Sweet Home,
which was actually pretty good.
Yeah, not bad for late 80s Japanese horror flick.
Special effects were great.
Yeah, it's very got that sort of poltergeist, Raiders of the Lost Ark style.
Special effects.
It's got charm to it.
So did you ever play the game though? Did you ever actually play the game, or did you not?
Yes, I have. I played some of it. I've never actually beaten it, but so Sweet Home is actually, if you go back and look at that game, that's like where like the classic door opening scene came from.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and
Which racks up the tension, by the way, a lot.
yeah, and you know what's interesting about that was when they did the GameCube remake, they the GameCube had the power to render the mansion without the door opening sequences.
Yeah,
but
because they were disguised loading.
Yeah, initially, yeah. But test audiences complained that it felt weird and unnatural to not have them there, so they stuck them back in.
Yeah, it just I don't know what's about it. It just kind of it's like
it's kind of got its own charm.
You don't even see what's ahead of you once you open the door. It's a blackness beyond it, and you're like, shit. What am I gonna see?
Weird void behind the door.
Yeah, and like you're like basically like, what am I gonna see once it comes back? That's what made it so tense. You kind of hate it, and I hated going down upstairs and stuff like that. Like, oh no, ladders, not stairs, ladders.
Yeah,
it was the same thing.
Like anytime you like descend, there's like sewers.
And you're like, there's gonna be there's just gonna be a big mouth of teeth at the bottom of there.
Yeah.
Need that.
Yeah, just any sewers in general, any closed and tight spaces in horror games are just not things you really want to stay clear from them.